Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. Today's special guest is Cody Ziglar. You know him as the writer of Amazing Spider-Man from Marvel Comic Books. Now come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Ziglar. Pleasure to speak with you, sir.
Nice to meet you, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's definitely my pleasure. I'm loving what you did with Amazing Spider-Man.
Thank you.
So as I was reading, I was wondering, what inspired you to become a writer, and who were your earliest influences?
Well, I've always been into like this stuff. Like I have a distinct memory of being like, I guess 12 or 13. And like the first time I saw Toonami came on the air, I was like, oh, wait, you can like, this is the thing that I'm going to be into forever. And like, I always watched The Simpsons and stuff. And like, I remember they would always have jokes about like the writer's room is all this and this. And as a kid, I was like, wait, people make cartoons? Like I know you could write this stuff. And like, as I got older, I finally figured that, yeah, you can do this as like a career. And I was lucky enough to be able to somehow weasel my way into doing it professionally.
So as a writer, how did you learn to be a writer? Like where did you go to hone your skills? How did you learn the practice of comic book script writing?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I made a bunch of garbage. That's the truth. Like I made a bunch of bad stuff for a really long time. And I think some could argue I'm still making some of those bad things, but I basically ended up going to film school at this place called the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. And I studied like film and television, like directing and writing. I got my master's there. And part of the process of getting your master's was like, you have to either to graduate, you have to either teach a class or get an internship. And I was like, you definitely don't want me teaching. So I ended up getting an internship at Adult Swim, which I was a huge fan of because I watched, Toonami and stuff as a kid. And I was working under Dave Willis and Casper Kelly. And like Dave Willis, he did Aqua Teen, he did Squidbillies. They were doing Your Pretty Faces Going to Hell. Casper had literally just finished shooting Too Many Cooks. Like those are the dudes that I was just like studying under for like 4 or 5 months. It was crazy. And like long story short, I ended up getting like a writing job, and I got She-Hulk for Disney Plus. And like one of the second in command in the room was Zeb Wells, who obviously has been writing comics forever. And like our roles in the room very much were the MCU comic book nerds. Like whenever they're like, who can Jen deal with this week? Or like, what's a scenario that we can pluck from the comics that fans would really enjoy? And we'd literally yell for like 15 minutes. And then they'd be like, all right, that's great. Take a breather, calm down. And then Zeb was like, this guy is obviously one of my own. I got to introduce him to some comic book people. And he hooked me up with Nick Lowe, the editor for a bunch of the Spider books. And Nick gave me like my first Miles backup, a 10-page thing. He really enjoyed it. He gave me a one shot, a Siege Society one shot after that. And then I was very adamant, like, hey, if you're doing anything spider adjacent that involves a black person, please call me. He's like, great. Well, Ben Reilly is not black, but we'll see where that leads. And like, so like, Zeb was, putting together a team for the Beyond stuff because, he had obviously been writing TV forever. Like he'd been on Robot Chicken for like a decade. He had Super Mansion, and he liked the way that we worked in the room. And he was like, this will be an easy way to get you in because like you've written on a bunch of shows at this point, and like, how the flow is. You come in, like you break the overarching story of like what's happening, and then you go off and do your episodes or your issues in this case. So like, it was like just us on a Zoom with like, Kelly Thompson and Patrick and Saladin and Zeb. And like, we just talked about Spider-Man and what we wanted to do with it for like 3 hours. And then like, we all like took a breath and we're like, all right, great. Now I guess I get Craven and Doc Ock and Kelly wanted to do some stuff with Daughter to the Dragon. And so it was a really cool experience. And also it was just a great safety net for coming in. If I had a question, I could just go to Slack and like, hey, Kelly, you just won an Eisner. Does this make sense dialogue wise? And she's like, yeah, they just do this, this, and this. Or like, Patrick, you're one of the best artists in the game right now. What do you think about the blocking for this scene? And you're like, yeah, fix this, this, and this. And like, it was a really great intro to like writing a pretty big title, like basically pretty soon out the gate. Like I've been doing this for less than a year. So like having that sort of safety system that I'm used to with working in TV and film was definitely probably the best possible way to transition into comic book writing.
That's a wonderful roundtable to get to learn how to write, isn't it? Kelly
yeah,
Thompson,
it's great.
Wells, they're amazing. They're good people. They're amazing writers. That's like an Algonquin roundtable of just genius comic book writers.
Yeah, and then it's just me like taking down notes. All right, do this, this. Yeah, it was really a cheat code. I really got the cheat sheet when I came in.
Now, as someone who has a degree in film and television, how closely related is writing film to writing a comic book? Because I know they both basically starts as scripts, but I know
Mhm.
that stylistic a little bit different. So how close did they mirror each other? At least how you did it.
That's a good question, dude. Like, it's sort of similar in that like it's you're writing, but the formatting is so different. This is something that I'm still working on. Is that if you read that first thing I wrote, like that first long form 30-page one shot, like there's just so much talking and dialogue because I was coming from TV where like you have 30-40 page scripts and like Rick has to yell at Morty about getting rid of the portal gun or whatever. So like they talk fast and there's a lot happening. So like I was used to that. And like Nick Lowe was like, hey, I know you're coming from this TV space, but like the artists, they are also part of the visual storytelling. I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense. So like a lot of it has been leaning into like if I think of it now as like if I'm like directing something, like it's like the relationship you have with like the cinematographer, the DP, like that's the relationship I like to have with the artist now, is that like Paco Medina I've worked with him on 3 or 4 books at this point, and like our rapport is just perfectly down packed now. Like he always sends all his emails like, love you, buddy, have a good weekend. And like it's just so friendly, but it's also cool being like, yeah, I know that he is a very talented storyteller. Like I know that Michael Dowling is a very talented visual storyteller. So like I don't have to put every single thing on the page as I would if I'm writing like a TV script or a feature script or whatever. So like that's been the biggest thing. But also like the way that like comic scripts are like actually formatted, where it's like page 1, 4 panels, and like you're describing what happened, like all that stuff is so fun because you're literally just like, for me anyway, like I just channel being a kid, like Miles is swinging towards frame and he says, oh no, I'm running out of time, and then in the background you see this and this, like all that stuff is just like icing on the cake, and it's so fun. And like it's also just nice knowing that you're going to write a thing and that it will be out in like 4 to 5 months, as opposed to like TV or film with like we wrote on She-Hulk in like 2019 and like it still hasn't come out yet, and Rick and Morty won't be out for like another 2 or 3 years. There's some like instant gratification of like making a piece of art that is then like out in the world that people can hopefully enjoy.
Now, psychologically, since you're used to thinking in moving images from film and TV, how do you get yourself to think in the static image of the comic book world?
That's a lot of it is, that's also a thing that I've sort of been learning, is that like a lot of it is the storytelling is like in the cut too. It's like there's a lot of comics is obviously sequential art, so like you'll need to connect the like if it's like if it's like an animated frame doing like 124 or 24 seconds, 24 frames per second, like you don't need to see every single frame. Like you can see like Miles is opening the door and then like he's jumping, and like our brains can like just connect that what happened the in-betweens. Like that's been really fun. Also, I got to give a shout out once again to Zeb, and that he gave me like his basically his cheat sheet when I first got my first comic. He sent me an email with like his process, and it really like I still use it to this day. Like anytime any of my friends are like first getting into their first comic, I send it to them. Like it's such a fantastic cheat sheet with like it's like you do all the like sort of like the boring eating your vegetables, like plotting everything out, and like you write down, like you do out like a grid of like the 20 pages, and then like you just write like really roughly what happens, like character gets into a fight and like the down moment, all that stuff, and then you can go and sort of get into the nitty gritty with like actually fleshing out what happens per page. Like that's been really fun. It's just like seeing like the cool moments that happen in between. Like you don't need to show Ben like opening the window and climbing out. You could just show him busting through and then swinging around, and like the brain can connect those like visual storytelling dots. It's been really cool to learn.
Now, as someone who's an indie writer myself, and obviously a lot of our listeners are probably from the indie comic world, who are all trying to find our way as comic book script writers, right? And we're all doing it. I mean, Will and I mean, I've written a few books, some other, and I'm still learning. Everyone else is as well. That cheat sheet that Zeb Wells gave you, what is like, what do you say the key cheat in there that really kind of opened the door for you, and you thought to yourself, it's starting to make more sense to me. Like now, it's all it's like that. I wasn't like Monk or like Sherlock Holmes, where you see like all the words laid up. He's like,
you see the Matrix code.
Now. Yeah, right. It all makes sense now.
Honestly, it's he I can't remember the exact wording that he uses, but he's like he gets to the part like he's like, we're actually in the nitty gritty of actually writing. He says like 3 pages per day, no more, no less. Why 3? Because you can do it, and once you get done, you feel so accomplished. And why less? Because if you do less, you're gonna get miserable. So like 3 pages a day. If you're doing a 20-page standard comic, it's done in 4 or 5 days, counting like spreads and double splashes. And then like once I realized that, I was like, oh yeah, I can like not stress out about having to write 20 pages in one day and hope them all be perfect. And like I can just have an achievable goal. Like that to me is like that was like the key fucking unlocking. Can we curse on this? I didn't mean to curse, but
no, go for it. We can swear all fucking day.
Oh great, yeah. That's like the key fucking unlocking the door. Like, oh yeah, like if I know that I just have to do 3 things today, one, I can spend more time like on it and not necessarily like sweating about how I'm going to get to page 50 or 25 or whatever. And like 2, when I'm done, when I get done the next day, I can go back and like re-edit those pages and like punch them up and stuff. And like that was really like the light bulb dinging over my head. And like that's literally every single day, every time that I'm on deadline for a comic, when I get done with like my whatever like my main job is for the day, I'm like, oh, 3 pages, I can knock that out in like an hour and a half, and then like I'm done for the work and fun for the day, and I feel like I've accomplished so much more, even though it's really just like, you know, on like the really good day, it's just like a double spread of like Craven punching Peter or whatever, and like that's the work that I had to do for the day. It's like it was honestly like a complete game changer, and like it's made life so much easier, like navigating stuff and like juggling different work.
That is incredibly smart. 3 pages a day. That sounds like a really is a perfect number. and it also has that the great number 3. You know, that's in like most culture and all that. Also,
yeah.
Oh, that's really smart.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess it makes why Zeb Wells is so popular.
Yeah, exactly. He's a very busy dude too. So like the fact that he can still put out good stuff consistently is like he's honestly cracked it.
It is hard not to be envious of someone such as Zeb Wells, who's been successful that long, doing that much great work. You're like, motherfucker, save it for the rest of us. Save it for the rest of us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've written for Robot Chicken. You've done Rick and Morty, and you also worked on Craig of the Creek, right? And I mean, Rick and Morty is definitely more adult humor.
Yeah.
Robot Chicken definitely hits that adult humor. Spider-Man and Craig from the Creek is definitely for a slightly younger group. How do you kind of like adjust your sense of humor to kind of make sure you're writing that line between, you know, make sure it's funny, make sure the quips for Spider-Man are just fine, but also you don't want to quite ride into that robot, you know, that Rick and Morty where like, the editors are going to kill me on this one.
Yeah, you know, I'm pretty cognizant of it just because like I watch a bunch of different stuff at the same time anyway. So like, and when you're in the room, like for Craig of the Creek, for instance, like, you know, we're not going to have, you know, Craig pull out like a blaster and blow up an alien or something like that. It's like that's like I just move in that mindset when I'm writing something like Ben's, I guess, can be a little bit more edgy because he is like an actual like adult who's like gone through stuff. But even with Miles, like I try to treat him like, you know, PG-13 seems like a pretty good range for him. Like I don't think he's gonna like, you know, hopefully he's not gonna shoot someone, or he's not gonna drop a hard F-bomb because he stubs his spider toe. But like also like I also try to think about like who's actually like reading the thing, and like comics now are like there's such a large gap. There's like, you know, the younger people that are reading, like people like not even Miles's age, people like preteens reading it, and like people like our age, like adults and stuff reading it. So like because of that, and because I think that now culturally we're a little bit more attuned to like that type of like storytelling with like even things like regular show, like it was a kid's show, but like there's still some pretty funny adult stuff that's going to go over your heads. Or even like old Simpsons, like a kid's not going to get like a Hitchcock reference. Like I never got a Hitchcock reference when I was like 10 watching Homer yell at Bart or whatever. So like now that's sort of like a cultural like media thing that people can understand, like so I can write, you know, more towards like a younger audience, but still have some like adult jokes and stuff, or stuff that I think older people would appreciate reading it through.
Do you ever try to sneak one in, you know, a joke that, you know, is not quite Spider-Man ready, but you're like, let's see what happens. Let's see if it makes it on through.
Yeah, there's and I think is it 84 or no, not 84, 79 when Craven shows up to Ben Riley. I was listening to like a lot of Jay-Z, and there's a line where Ben is like whipping at Craven. He says, Craven's giving his big like expo dump. I'm here, blah 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 blah. And he's like, oh damn, that's crazy. You crazy for this one, Kay? And like that's just a line from like, you know, 99 Problems or whatever. Like where Jay-Z is like, you crazy for this one, Rick? To Rick Ross. And like I didn't think it would get through, but it made me laugh really hard. And then like it came through, like we get like the letterings, and like one of the editors like, what is this? And then another editor was like, this is a reference to Jay-Z. It's really funny, leaving in. So like the fact that he made it all the way through was a very shining moment, very proud moment for myself.
That's pretty cool. Have you ever had an editor come back with you with something really kind of funny? Be like, yeah, they definitely got me on this one. like something like they really like nailed you on something.
I've been lucky so far, but I mean, anytime there's like a super deep cut reference, or if like I have a habit of like writing as I talk or as my friends talk. So sometimes like, I don't know if Janine would necessarily use this type of slang or like drop her G's this hard or stuff. It'll be like really small things that I'm like, oh yeah, not everyone talks like I talk or like how my group chat talks. Like it is easier with like Miles, obviously, like his friends, because like they're young, usually black or people of color. So like it's easier that stuff. But like honestly, I've been very lucky and like knocking on wood that like most of the stuff the editors come back have been very, very enthusiastic. And if something does bump them, there's another editor that's like, oh yeah, I get the weird esoteric joke this dude was going for.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. When you're writing for Amazing Spider-Man, I can't help but think the challenge that exists there, because not only you're writing for one of the most iconic characters probably ever. I mean, most people would say it's Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, or like the big three. And then if there's a Mount Rushmore, Wonder Woman's there as well, but Spider-Man's definitely there. But not only that, though, but you're writing between Zeb Wells, Saladin Ahmed, Patrick Gleason, and the way it's being written is that literally your stories come in between each other.
Yeah.
So is it hard to stay consistent with that writing? I mean, are you trying to match their voices and what they're doing? Are you trying to just write your own and they're matching you? Like, how do you guys all kind of mix your writing to make sure it sounds like the same characters consistent through those different stories?
I think that's where the TV angle of it helps, at least from my perspective, is that like that's what TV is. Like, if you come in, like if you do 10 episodes of Rick and Morty, like you basically sort of break the episodes of the overarching season together. But then it's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go off and write my stuff. And then I bring it back, and then like the room will like punch it up together. In this case, that's what Zeb and Nick were doing, is that like, we had pretty carte blanche to do what we want to do with our story wise, but like we still had a slack to be like, hey, for instance, like I think Zeb's has already come out. But like the beginning of his, like I think he wrote that after I had already turned in my 85. So like there was some stuff that he came back and was like, hey, can you just like switch your ending a little bit to like so it flows in a little bit more towards mine, because this is what I'm trying to do. I was like, oh yeah, totally, I can totally do that. Like that's a whole part of the process. But when it comes to like language and stuff, like that's really when you see, or how I saw like how fucking useful the editors are, because they're like reading. Like at some point there's like a dozen, like at least had to be like a dozen scripts that are in varying stages, and then like that's including like all the like the one-off like the .bei stuff, and like so like they're just like juggling all this stuff, being like, all right, we can't have this happening, like this character's not talking like this, blah 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 blah. So like a lot of it was like I luckily we had a shield, and that like Nick Lowe and his diligent team of editors were like making sure everything made sense, like just story wise. But like also like part of the fun of comics is that you do get a little bit more freedom than you do with like a TV show or whatever. So like like I want to see like Kelly's voice, like she has a really really beautiful metaphor, and I can't remember her issue. I can't remember which one it is. It was early on where Ben's talking to Dr. Kaffa about like the anchor, like how, some people vision anchors usually as a bad thing, but really it's there to hold you in place. It's a really beautiful thing. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's just like Kelly's voice coming through. And like, that's the stuff that like, I really enjoy, is that like, yes, there's like, it's like 65% like, conformity as far as like making sure we hit all this stuff and like it has a singular voice, but like that remaining 35% when like you get to see someone's voice is the thing that I really enjoy. And like reading Zeb stuff, like the way that he can like make really like 3 lines of dialogue so fucking funny, and it can be such a throwaway, but also it colors the entire world that you're doing. Like it's stuff that like I read those moments and I'm like, oh, this is the stuff that I want to strive to be like. I've never been like, I don't think anyone that does stuff creatively is like, oh yeah, I'm good, I figured out. Like they're never at that point. They're always like, we have to constantly be doing better and better, and like being in that environment has been really really cool, especially when you're like Saladin. Like I fucking love Miles, so like being able to like watch him in real time write a Miles story was just like chef's kiss. Like I couldn't have asked for a better cooler thing to experience.
So, I mean, when you're writing next to the guys, like I said, like Zeb, Patrick Gleason, Kelly Thompson, who have these long, successful careers in writing, and you're kind of, when you're working with each other, do you feel, or when did you feel ready that you could stand up and go, this is what I think needs to be, this is what I'm going to stand on, saying this has to be like this. I'm going to make sure I'm Cody Ziglar, and this is definitely what's going to happen. Like, do you feel like, when did you feel like you felt the confidence to say, I'm going to stick with what I'm doing, and you're going to have to conform now to how my stories move in?
Well, the cool thing about it is that, like, everything was like so unanimous. Like, everyone was like in the same vibe. They were never like, this isn't working, we don't like this. Like, I remember I pitched the angle for like Craven in the Slack. It was like, I was like, oh, this is gonna be, I don't know how they're, I don't know. I mean, it's pretty easy, it's pretty like mundane by like, comic book standards, but like, or like bigger like media standards. But I was like, yeah, Craven's probably pissed that like he thinks fucking this new Spider-Man is sold out, and like now he's just like another corporate drone in the machine. Like, that's his angle. Like, he's pissed that this guy is part of a corporation that's like just ruining the world and like giving nothing of value to the planet. Like, that's his angle. And like, and like, I remember Saad immediately was like, he gave like a little fire emoji like on it. He's like, this is great, this is such a cool angle, blah blah blah. So I was like, oh great, that was like my wild pitch that I thought no one would like. So like, immediately that's the environment. So like, everyone is so cooperative and so into the idea of like having you be successful, that like they never shoot down any ideas. So that's the cool part, because also they're all great professionals, so like they also know what they're doing. And also like, I think also having Zeb in my corner being like, hey, you're here for a reason. Like, we like what you did on She-Hulk, and like we think you made a pretty cool episode, and so like you earned your spot here. So like, that was a really cool aspect. Like, everyone just like, you just felt very welcomed, and like everyone made a point of being like, you're here for a reason. So like, that made it a much less stressful than I think it would have been if I had not known that or heard that going into it.
Well, I mean, that support is fantastic. One interesting challenge, I think, is writing Ben Reilly, because he's kind of like Peter Parker, but he's not. I mean, he's the clone, but he's had over the years a different path in his life. He experienced different things. He's had different successes, different failures. So when you're writing Ben Reilly, how do you kind of make it Peter Parker, but kind of not Peter Parker at the same time?
Yeah, he has that through line. He's got sort of an easier through line, because he obviously, like you say, he's literally a clone. Is that like, so like, I think not only a through line between most of the Spider personas, but particularly with him and Pete, is that they have the humor. Like, I think that's really when like you see the crossover, is that like whenever they have the mask on, like I think that's when Ben is his most Pete in the best way possible, and still having his identity. It's that like, he wants to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Like, he has earned this. It's literally in his DNA. And the only difference is that like he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Like when like if Peter goes left, Ben may go right in the situation. But like, there's a moment that I really wanted to hit when I think it might have been 79, when like I think Ben just leaves seeing Pete at the hospital, and like he's about to do his like friendly neighborhood Spider-Man thing, and like he stops a robbery, and like he saves a little kid from being hit by a thing. And like in my mind, like when I'm writing that, I'm like, oh, this is everything he's ever possibly wanted. Like, this is what he wants to do. Like, he wants to do good for like the little person on the street. He wants to be a ground level person that like, he's telling this kid, yeah, you met Spider-Man, and like you're gonna tell your friends, and now like you never see it, but like maybe that kid, like if they were going to some things, like maybe now they finally have friends, or like they have an outing. Like, that's the stuff that he's really into. And like I think, unlike Pete, he's been like denied it. Obviously, like he was killed a bunch and re-brought back to life by the jackals, like, and all the weird comic book stuff that you have to have in the stuff. But like, I think emotionally, like his journey is that like he is finally his trial, or his labor, if you want to put it in like the heroic myth terms, is that like he wants to be accepted, and he wants to earn his place in the world. And like I think now he's finally starting to earn it, and like that's what really brings him joy, and that's what makes it a little bit more distinctive to write for Peter. Because I think one with Pete is that like he's he's always usually going through it in some sense, like he's working a really shitty job, or he's trying to make his way through school, but like, he's never had everything taken from him from that regard, and then having to build his way back up. And that's been really fun to like write from just Ben's perspective in that regard.
And and a lot of people who have been following Spider-Man for years and years, obviously Ben Reilly has a little bit of baggage with him back from the Clone Saga that was not always the most best received storyline going back. God, how many years? It's been 20 something years, not 25 years. It's been a long time. When you're writing Ben Reilly, do you kind of want to avoid hitting those storylines again from back then? Do you kind of try to make it, history from only a few years ago? Like, how do you once again acknowledge what came before, and also kind of make sure it's still not only fresh, but bounce away from some of the maybe rougher points in his history storyline?
Yeah, I never really actually was that cognizant of it. I was like, I sort of know his history just because like every general, like I think Marvel comic nerd sort of knows the history, and that like Also, like, you know, with the like the format of the Beyond arc being like, this is what the situation is like, I know that like Ben's never had like a stable 9-to-5 corporate job, so already like we're like completely out the gate, and it's so different. And also, like, you know, there's a certain point where like Ben stopped thinking he was Peter. So like Peter has had completely different new experiences than Ben has had at that point. Like, even with like, you know, I don't think Ben's ever really fought like the clone Craven, like the 2 cloned and all that stuff. Or like Ben's never had to have a training session with the Daughters of the Dragon because he has to pass his PD test or whatever. And like all that stuff has been fun. So like, but just because we've had such a different setting as far as like just the time and place, and also just like a new crop of writers, like it hasn't been hard to like not hit those things. But also, like, you know, there is some stuff that you see like that the double spread in 80, where like you see like Ben's face on the left panel, Ben's face on the right, and you see like his history in the back. Like that's like that was me like, all right, that's done. Like you can see he's experienced all this stuff, but like he's moving on, and like he's trying to experience some new stuff as opposed to being like stuck in the past.
Now, I think one of the things that you did as genius is that using Dr. Octopus, because everyone knows not only the history. I mean, Dr. Octopus not only is a hugely well-known rogues gallery villain of Spider-Man, but he's also the superior Spider-Man from a very, once again, well-remembered storyline. So he has been Peter Parker, quite literally Peter Parker. Ben Reilly kind of like Peter Parker, and that's an interesting situation. They both have an interesting perspective on what it was to be Peter, and not only that, but Dr. Octopus in many ways might have been the better Peter Parker and at that moment. So I mean, was that a fun thing to do, to have their interactions of these two characters who both on some level were Peter Parker?
It was fun. It was definitely fun because, I mean, there was like, this is when like the weird comic book stuff gets to it, because I feel like, you know, Otto remembered superior Spider-Man, but doesn't remember being Peter. It's like there was like the weird, like I remember Nick Lowe, the editor, was explaining it to me. I was like, all right, let me pull out my chalkboard so I can like not fuck up what the story is. But like when what is cool about that stuff is that like you get to see the hints of like Doc sort of like maybe vaguely remembers all like the, like not necessarily who Peter is, but like he remembers like the feeling of being Spider-Man. Like he doesn't necessarily maybe not know that, at least at the jump, he may not know that Ben isn't the Spider-Man that he's used to. So like a lot of it is still like him sort of thumping his chest, being like, man, you fucking up right now. If you really want to do it, like you should let me put on that suit and do it the right way. Let me go ahead and talk to Maxine, and like I'll restart this program and show it the real way. But the real fun thing about Ock is that he's just such an anime villain. Like I just envisioned him as like you know, he's like unless he's like an older, grumpy or fatter Vegeta. Like that's always been like the way that I envision him. So like writing him as like a guy that yells boy a lot for some reason. Like I don't know, it was just a fun character to write with, and like I could channel my weeb instincts into like this Western comic book.
That's awesome. And another thing about Dr. Octopus is that he is a villain, but sort of. I mean, yeah,
he's got some gray morality going on.
Yeah, I mean, in your storyline with the Beyond Corporation, it seems like on some level his reasoning isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, they did seem to steal his intellectual property. He does seem to have a valid point. So when you're writing him in that moment, how much do you want the audience to kind of side with Dr. Octopus? Because I think most of us, especially nowadays, kind of like this anti-corporate sentiment is pretty strong, with especially our generation, the newer generation. Dr. Octopus is kind of going up against it, and in many ways, Ben Reilly is fighting for the man right now. You know what I'm saying? I mean, how do you, you know, how much do you want the reader to identify with Dr. Octopus at that moment?
I mean, yeah, you know, corporations are bad. Capitalism is a prison. I think I think most people are starting to realize that those things are not good. Yeah, you know, it's one of those things where like Doc is sort of having his falling down moment, where like he's going about it the exact wrong way that you should do it, but like he does have a point. It's like, yeah, this you know, Beyond stole stuff from him, his intellectual property, which I guess is murky because he technically took it from Peter, but whatever. Like, you know, like he stole a thing, and like they're also using it from his point of view, the stupidest, most petty reason. Like, all right, they made a corporate Spider-Man and like they have a talking fish and like they have like what do they just do? Like they're just having like it's like unchecked corporate expansion. Like they just have division upon division upon division. Like what's the end game? Like there's no vision. Like there's no curation to like what you guys are doing. And like that's very much what Doc's angle was. And like, you know, I think, you know, with the lead up from the issue with him and Aunt May is that like, you know, he's an anti-hero. Like he may have a couple more like RPG points towards the chaotic evil or whatever than he should be, but like at this point in his life, I think, you know, something has carried over from his Superior Spider days where like he wants to do good, he's just not very good at doing it. And then also like his ego, it gets in the way sometimes where like he becomes selfish and like he wants to do things for his own end. Like he wants to like, he doesn't necessarily want to take down Beyond because they're objectively bad thing. He wants to do it because he thinks Maxine slighted him in some way.
I mean, I guess as a writer, you as well, and creatives, we can all kind of identify with the idea that someone stole your intellectual property because you know, because you're like, son of a bitch, you know, that's my idea, that's my story, or someone, or there's the whole thing with was it NFTs, or there's someone stealing images and shit. So I definitely think to myself, Doc has a point. He has a valid point.
Yeah. I
mean, it really is, and it's a lot of fun. And there's some in that Beyond Corporation, some of the images you had in, I think it was issue, was it 84, 85, where you have some of those rooms that you had the talking fish, you had the one with the sandwiches and so the burgers, whatever. There's some crazy stuff you're putting in there.
And that was all set up from Kelly. Like she had in her issue, there was a moment where they were just like leaning into like the weirdness of Beyond, where like you see the little fish guy talking to like a Beyond scientist, and like you just see a guy coming out of the sandwich department looking absolutely shook. So when I was writing it, Nick was like, "Hey, yeah, if you want to lean into the weirdness for a little bit," it's like, "Oh yeah, I can crack out my Rick and Morty brain for a second and have a fun, bizarre panel or two, and then go back into like the actual story."
I mean, I was wondering what guys were smoking while you were writing some of this stuff down. So, what you guys, who you guys are grooming to be the big bad of your current storyline seems to be Maxine Danger. Would that be fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
So, as a villain, when you're creating a villain in the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery, which is what probably the top 2 or 3 most famous rogue galleries in all the comic books.
Mm-hmm.
How are you finding Maxine Danger's place within that rogues gallery where she's not a copy of somebody else, but is a unique villain within that huge gallery?
I mean, first of all, I got to give a shout out to Kelly Thompson. That was her character. Like she pitched that character pretty much from whole cloth. She was like, you know, and everyone agreed, is like, you know, who wants another muscly evil dude, or like he's an evil scientist twirling his mustache. Like, what if it's just like a really competent corporate vampire, not in a literal vampire sense, but like just someone who's like a badass businesswoman who knows how to do her shit, and like she doesn't take shit from anyone, and like her whole thing is like trying to get to increasing the bottom dollar at the end of the day. Like that's her thing. And like she's ruthless in the way that anyone who's worked for any type of media company or worked for any type of like big corporation is like, that's what she is. And like I think that's what makes it interesting, is that like Maxine's not gonna like punch you, she's not gonna like, you know, get into a mech suit and fight you. She's going to hire someone to do it. She's going to hire an R&D division to create the suit. She's going to hire a bunch of candidates to come through and intern and learn and do it. And then she's going to send that after you. Like, that's what makes Maxine one so dangerous, but also just like fun to write for. Like, you know, most of the scenes so far have been her like getting a manicure or like drinking her martini and chilling and like letting everyone else do like the really hard work, or like her having meetings. Like, I don't know if Zeb's issue has come out, but there's like a really fun thing that Zeb has going on. One of his issues that's just like detailing what like a typical morning is like for her, and it's so funny, but also so like evil and devious, and like it's complete capture. But like that's what's fun about Maxine, is that like, you know, Kelly pinched a really cool idea of her character concept, and then we all just sort of piled on, and like it's made her stand out because she is so much different than like anyone else that you've seen in like Miles in Peter or Ben's or any of the Spidey's Rogue Galaxy. Is like a very competent villain that's also you know, not directly engaging in most of the fighting. She's letting the other people do it for her.
So have you received any editor's notes from Disney saying this hits too close to home?
No, not yet, thank God.
They're like, oh crap, he's on to us. How did they figure it out? We've been
an
evil corporation for us.
Yeah, who would have thought?
So what's next in the world of comic books from you? are you still doing alternate issues of Amazing Spider-Man? Are you what are the other projects, the pipeline that you're working on?
Yeah, so I got some cool shorts along with a bunch of really other fucking dope Black artists and writers, and Marvel Voices Legacy that drops in February. But then I'm doing 5-issue miniseries for Spider-Punk. Another like the check cashed in of me yelling about I want to write a Black Spider-Man. They're like, well, this one likes punk. I was like, well, you obviously came to the right guy. Like you, another 6'5" Black man with pink hair that used to play in punk bands. Like I'm the guy to come to if you want to write about that. So like, great.
That's awesome.
So that's been really fun. The art team has been so fucking cool. Like there's a bunch of really, really cool shit in there. And like just literally having a universe where everyone is just like a punkified, dirty version of themselves is so fun to play with. And like,
that's awesome.
I can't wait for people to see like some of the characters that we've somehow managed to sneak into the punk verse. It's really, really fun. Really.
So
those are the main things.
So when does that come?
That I think Spider-Punk, I think the first one drops in April. I'm writing issue 3 right now, and I just got some art back from the last issue, and like it's cool. I don't want to toot my own horn, but like the artist killed it. Like it's so fucking fun and so different, and like it's just like everything that like any a 6-year-old me would want to do is like put on my I mean like a Spider-Punk playlist on Spotify. So like I'm just listening to punk all day, every day, writing these issues. It's been super fun.
Are you able to tell me who the artist is or not yet?
Oh yeah, Justin Mason. He's I don't know why I'm looking at like I'm going to send you this information. Justin Mason, he's the artist. He did this is his first like Marvel book proper. Like he did some stuff for DC. He did I think a Firestorm backup with another friend of mine, Jeff Trammell, and like the colorist is Jim Sharla Labapidis. I hope I'm not butchering his name, but like it's really cool. Like Justin does this really cool thing with like the webs that Hobby shoots that like it feels like old like Spawn, like it just like you just so detailed and knot and thick and stuff, and like and then Jim comes in and adds these like insane like visual poppy colors. It's like it's been so cool. Like I just got a double spread that I literally just got like a double spread he sent back like before we started this, and like I'm just looking at it being like, man, I can't wait to like people just like take this and put it to like their Tumblr or their Instagram or whatever. Like these people enjoy the art that these guys are making. It's been really, really fun.
That's cool. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I hope, cool, dude.
When it comes out, you should come on and talk about that when I get to read some of it.
I could yell about punk stuff all day, every day, dude. Let me know whenever.
I totally will. I will hold you to that, but just to let you know.
Yeah.
So one other question, because like, as you mentioned, so you're a producer. You've been a producer on numerous podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who is on a podcast, what can you offer to how do you create a good podcast? What secrets did you take on as producer that you can share with the podcast world out there?
My secret is not very good because I just tell it to everyone that when I first got the job and they gave me any type of executive power. So like they were like, hey, you can develop shows and produce shows. I was like, great. I just called all my friends that I thought were funny and I thought would make good shit, and we just made a bunch of weird shit. And eventually they were like, oh, this is good. Well, I guess we'll put this through. The real key is like just making shit that you care about, like, you know, making something you would actually want to listen to for an hour or whatever the thing is, and like something that brings you joy, because otherwise, like, what's the point? Like, who wants to make the thing that you don't like? Like, who has time for that? And like, that's been sort of the modus operandi I've had under anything. Is like I don't want to. Like, why do I want to do this? It doesn't bring me joy. Like, I don't want to make something that makes me fucking miserable. Who cares? Like, life is too short to like choke down a paycheck for something that makes you absolutely miserable. So like, I think if you something that you're passionate about, like a subject, whether it's like this or it's cooking or it's model making or it's fucking doing gardening, whatever the thing is, like, the thing about that is like, there are going to be at least 50 other people that are into the exact same thing that you're into, probably more, but like there's going to be an audience for it. And also like you get to have fun making a thing creatively that also has a very low barrier for like entry as far as like money goes. Like the podcasting was the first thing I ever did when I moved to LA in like 2015. I was sleeping on a fucking friend. My friend was back home in Nigeria. I was sleeping on his cot in Highland Park, making $13 an hour at a job I absolutely fucking hated. It made me miserable. I think I had like a hour and a half commute to get there, like a 2-hour commute. It was just fucking bad. But like every Sunday, me and my two buddies who also moved to LA with me from film school, we spent like $40 on like a USB mic, and we just recorded something, and that's what we did creatively. That's how we got our creative outlet out of it. The reason I even got fucking She-Hulk was because I was producing a podcast. One of the hosts had to go shoot something for Netflix, and I stepped in. And then a couple days later, the other host was like, "Hey, do you have a pilot or a sample?" I was like, well, "Yeah, I guess." And then I got a call from my manager being like, "She-Hulk wants to, or Marvel wants to meet with you." And then I walked in, and like the showrunner Jessica Gao was like, "Yeah, I heard you on this podcast. I thought you were funny. So we decided to ask if you would like had something to read." And like so, like it leads to a bunch of different stuff, but also it's just a creative outlet that you can do with with having spent a lot of money, which is very helpful for, I think, for people getting into it, but also just like Black and brown people that don't have a lot of money, or just marginalized people in general, like having access to creative outlet that doesn't require a ton of investment is a super useful thing. So all that long-winded to say, making something that you actually care about or you're interested in, like that's so much more useful than like trying to find the hot thing or trying to chase the dragon or letting the tail wag the dog. Like doing the shit that you want to do is going to be so much more fun and fulfilling for the person making it than chasing the shit that you don't even fucking care about, because then you're like, oh, this is just a job at this point. you know?
Right. Oh, Mr. Ziegler, great pleasure was talking with you. You're fantastic.
Thanks for checking in.
No, it's definitely my pleasure. I love talking about Spider-Man. And when you do Spider-Punk, you're definitely coming back on to talk about it. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, let's do it, dude. All right. Awesome. Enjoy the rest of your day, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Have a fantastic day. And I'll let you know the moment this goes live. You as well, sir.